If the interpretation team could please do a 10 count on the English channel only, just a 10 count.
One, two, three, four, five, six, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
And a 10 count on the French channel, please, just a 10 count. Thank you very much, interpretation team.
of all the technology I used growing up in a museum now. It's like great.
Hello, everybody. We will get started in 2 minutes, just to give everybody some time to log into the meeting. And we'll start in one more minute. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting of May 13th, 2025. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the city of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, you can use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, residents can still make written submissions to council. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I'd like to take a moment before we begin our proceedings to reflect on the profound importance of public service. At its core, public service represents our collective commitment to improving the communities we call home. Whether through elected office, volunteer work, or citizen advocacy, those who dedicate their time and expertise to public causes strengthen the very fabric of our city. They remind us that our greatest achievements come not from individual pursuits alone, but from our shared dedication to preserving and enhancing what makes our community special. Today, I'd like to acknowledge two individuals who exemplify this spirit of service in different ways, one whose legacy we honor, and another whose journey with us is just beginning. It is with great sadness that I inform those who might not have yet heard about the passing of David Fleming on April 25th at the age of 79. David was a pillar of Ottawa's heritage community and a passionate advocate for preservation. For nearly 25 years, David contributed his expertise and energy to Heritage Ottawa, including 9 years of distinguished service as its president. Earlier this year, his tremendous dedication was recognized with the Louise and Eric Moore Award for Outstanding Volunteerism from Mayor Mark Sutcliffe during Heritage Day. David's career as a museum and heritage professional, spanning roles with National Historic Sites, Park Canada, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, and the Cumberland Heritage Village Museum, equipped him with remarkable insights that enriched our community's understanding of our shared past. What truly set David apart was his courage and conviction. He understood that preserving heritage wasn't just about buildings and artifacts, it was about protecting the stories and values that define us. He never hesitated to speak up, whether through media interviews, the occasional protest, public advocacy, or here at this committee on a regular basis. We thank him for his incredible contributions to our city. With the departure of member Dote, we are also pleased to welcome Brian Borns as our newest member of the Built Heritage Committee. Brian brings extensive experience in municipal planning and community development to our committee. Brian has been an Ottawa resident since 1971 and has dedicated much of his career to shaping our city's development. Brian served on Ottawa City Council from 1974 to 1985, where his accomplishments included chairing Ottawa's Planning Board, playing an instrumental role in establishing Ottawa's nonprofit housing corporation, at the time City Living, and developing Ottawa's Transitway Rapid Bus Network as chair of the region's Transportation Committee. Before politics, Brian worked as a journalist for local publications and was head of Centertown Citizens Planning Committee, where he advocated for increasing residential building in the neighborhood while making it a better place to live. We welcome Brian and look forward to the wealth of experience in urban planning, community engagement, and municipal affairs that he will bring to the Built Heritage Committee. Welcome. Colleagues, for today's meeting, I've received no regrets. I'd also actually be remiss, I'm sorry, if we didn't as well convey our condolences to David Jeans, who contributes to this committee on a regular basis for his recent personal loss. So today, for today's meeting, I've received no regrets. I will ask the committee coordinator to undertake a roll call of all members.
Member Quinn,
Present.
Councillor Kelly,
Present.
Member Madigan,
Present.
Councillor Troster,
Here.
Member Legault,
Present.
Councillor Lieber,
You see?
Member Borns, Vice Chair Pont,
You see.
Chair King.
Here. And we have quorum. Thank you so much. I'd also like to note, based on one of the agenda items, we will also have interpretation for today's meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes noted on the agenda confirmed for Tuesday, February 11th, 2025? Confirmed. Thank you so much. So I will now proceed with a consent agenda. We will hold designation of 172 O'Connor Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as there are registered speakers. We will also hold a designation of the former Bell Telephone buildings under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as there are registered speakers. We will hold designation of 323, 327 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as there are registered speakers. Designation of Église Saint Francois d'Assise, as well as Saint Joseph d'Orleans. We will hold that item as there are registered speakers. Designation of 251 Northwestern Avenue. We will also hold that item as there are registered speakers. Repeal of the bylaws designating 38 through to 44 Clarence Street, 520 Queen Elizabeth Driveway, 1518 Sittsville Main Street, and the Lemieux Island Bridge under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is only Heritage Ottawa registered to speak. Just wanted to ask Linda if the committee is prepared to carry this report. Do you still need to speak? Okay, so we will hold that item. The next item is update on amending bylaws for heritage conservation districts. There's no presentation on this item. There are no registered speakers. The committee has not received correspondence. Is there the will of committee to move this item on consent, to approve this item on consent?
Carried.
Thank you so much. There is a presentation for the Heritage Watch List update, which will require a motion, so we will hold that. We also have a councillor's item from Councillor Troster on 267 O'Connor Street. There is no presentation on this item. There are registered speakers from Taggart Group. I don't know if they're on the call. Just wanted to ascertain if the committee is prepared to carry this report, whether they would need to speak.
Hello there. If you are prepared to hold it, then no need to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next item, status update, Building Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending April 25th, 2025. There's no presentation. There are no registered speakers. Is it the will of committee to approve this item? Carried. Thank you so much. And the last two other substantive items. Information previously distributed. And these would be items that would be required to be lifted. I'll come back to those. So I will go back to our first item, which is the designation of 172 O'Connor Street for a presentation by staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is a presentation regarding the recommendation to issue a notice of intention to designate 172 O'Connor Street under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The property is located at the corner of Nepean and O'Connor Streets in Centertown. It is a 3-story red brick walk-up apartment building constructed in 1910 and known as the Rothsay Apartments. And most recently, it is, I should also say, it's a city-owned property right now and was most recently used as the cornerstone housing shelter for women. Next slide, please. So the property has been listed on the Heritage Register since 2020. Prior to that, it was listed on the City of Ottawa's former Heritage Reference List for many years as a building of cultural heritage value. It was identified for potential designation under Part 4 through the Heritage Planning Branch's Bill 23 review of all properties listed on the city's register. The building is in the process of being declared surplus to municipal needs, and there is a report expected at Finance Committee in June related to this. As a result of the building being declared, or the process to declare the building surplus, city staff accelerated the review and evaluation of the property that we had already identified for potential designation to make that decision prior to the building leaving the city's inventory. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of the cultural heritage value of the property, it meets 5 of the 9 criteria for designation under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. As you know, a property must meet 2 of the 5 criteria, or sorry, 2 of the 9 criteria. It meets criteria 1 as a representative example of the Edwardian classicist style of architecture, common in Centertown and common in Ottawa in the late 19th and early 20th century, characterized by its red brick, its symmetrical facade, and its various details. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a sense of the contextual value. So this slide shows you it on O'Connor Street, and we've got a historic photo and a current photo of the building. Constructed in 1910, it's one of the earliest walk-up apartment buildings in Centertown, characterizes the neighborhood. If you're familiar with the neighborhood, these are a very common building type throughout Centertown, and associated with sort of a period of expansion in the lead up to the First World War in Centertown. And interestingly, meets criteria 5 under the Heritage Act, as it yields information about the history of women in Ottawa and in the changing social status of women in the early 20th century. Many women were moving from the rural parts of the city or beyond into the core of the city in the lead up to the First World War and during the First World War, as it became more appropriate for women to live independently. And apartment buildings were starting to be seen as appropriate places for young single women to live. And they were taking jobs in the civil service, particularly during the First World War, as many men were away. And so we see, if you look at the city directories for this building, for the early years, you see it's occupied almost entirely by women, and which is kind of a very interesting piece. And you'll hear a bit later related to the Bell Telephone buildings. We've got kind of 2 stories here about the way women lived in the early 20th century and the way women worked in the early 20th century in Ottawa. This is a very interesting, and it's a pattern you can see across Centertown in a variety of walk-up apartment buildings. Next slide, please. Just to give you another sense of, the building hasn't changed very much during its time. It has contextual value because it fits in with the character of Centertown. It meets criteria 7 because as a red brick apartment building within the neighborhood, it helps to define that historic character of Centertown and is kind of at that almost northern edge of where we see these types of buildings remaining. And it's visually linked to its surroundings for its proximity to other walk-up buildings and functionally linked as a multi-residential building over the last 115 years. So it meets 5 of the 9 criteria for designation. Next slide, please. Here, this is just showing you the perspective from the side. Again, speaking to that, you can see on the map on the left, all of the pink on the fire insurance map would be red brick. Well, not necessarily red brick, but brick. In Centertown, likely red brick. So you can see how it kind of contributes to that. It anchors the corner at Nepean and O'Connor. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. Oh, we seem to be stuck. I think that's it anyway. Oh, maybe that's the last slide. Sorry, I thought there was a concluding slide. My apologies, everybody, especially to the clerk's office. That's it for the presentation. Staff are recommending that council issue a notice of intention to designate this property under Part 4 of the Heritage Act for its cultural heritage value. Happy to answer any questions committee members may have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, and we have 2 registered speakers, starting with Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa.
Good morning, and thank you. As noted in our submission, which I'm not going to read to you, I'm sure you've all read it, Heritage Ottawa is not opposed to the designation of this building. In fact, we fully support the designation of the building. What we are concerned about is something we've learned about recently concerning disposal by the city of heritage designated property. We learned about this when 3 properties, city-owned heritage designated Part 4 properties, were put on the list for disposal. Now, we do understand and appreciate that the city is reviewing land it owns in order to identify and dispose of such land for affordable housing, as is the case here, which is, this building is clearly a candidate for affordable housing. However, Dickinson House, a museum, and the Carriage House, and another building in Manotick, I forget the name, it's a bakery, and these buildings are not suitable for housing. In fact, it was noted in the report that they were not suitable for housing. But they form part of that Heritage Dickinson Square, which is a very important part of Manotick. So we're very concerned about how this decision is being made to dispose of heritage designated city properties. Who's making the decision? Is it up to real estate to decide? It is real estate, but it's also heritage. And I'm asking you the question, who should decide the ownership of a heritage building? And who should decide whether or not, because the reason given for disposing of it doesn't meet a city mandated purpose for disposing of all these buildings, including there's also a Jockville School. They're not a city mandated, they don't have a city mandated purpose. I was a bit shocked to read this, as were the people in Manotick, who are in fact working with city staff and their councillor to establish some form of transfer of ownership. But as you can understand, a nonprofit owning a museum is, without some kind of subsidy from the city, is probably not going to work. Anyway, you can read all about that aspect of this issue in the Heritage Ottawa newsletter, which you will be receiving shortly. Thanks.
Thank you so much. You do have questions from Councillor Troster.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. It's not so much as a question. I'll just let you know, I can't speak to Manotick property, but I can tell you that I did tour this property when it was being used as the emergency shelter for Cornerstone Housing for Women. And it was deeply inadequate, to say, to put it mildly. There were women sleeping 3 to 4 in a room that was not meant for that purpose. Incredibly narrow hallways, not accessible, tons of stairs. The mayor and I toured it early in my mandate. So we were really thrilled to be able to move Cornerstone to another facility. And the other thing I'll say is that we recently made surplus the parking lot that's right beside the Chinatown Arch, and that will be used to build new affordable housing in the neighborhood. So I'm hoping that this heritage designation, even if the property is being disposed of, will mean that it largely remains the same, or any interior changes that are made will still maintain the facade. But that was my understanding of the reason for disposal, is that the renovations would be very expensive, and it's really not suitable for what it was being used for as an emergency shelter. They were quite desperate to get out of there. So I don't know if you have any comment in that regard, if you think that the designation will help, mitigate the fact that the building is going to be made surplus.
Well, I would hope that it would mean that that someone who is interested in providing good quality affordable housing would be able to acquire it for $1 perhaps, and go ahead with a total renovation to bring it up to standard. That would be my hope. I have some experience in that area, in that the Sterling Tavern in Hintonburg was, it was seized by the city for back taxes, and the community association had to lobby with the city at the time to lower the price that the city, then I think it was the tax department, was insisting on having all of the back taxes paid. When, again, it was an abandoned building, had not been built as housing. And of course, it is now owned by CCOC. It's a very handsome building.
Property? Is that the former biker property that
Yes.
they purchased?
Yes, it was a bad bar in Hintonburg.
Yeah.
But it made excellent housing. And a lot of pigeons were left homeless, I regret to say.
Famously, the way they cut the ribbon, there's a historical photo. CCOC cut the ribbon by actually driving through it with Mr. Leather Ottawa on a motorcycle. Yeah, it's quite a.
I thought I was there, but I don't remember that.
No, anyway, thank you for that history. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
We appreciate those questions, Councillor Troster, and your comments. And I would just say to you, Linda, rest assured that I'm sure myself and some of my other colleagues will be asking questions internally to staff as to how we coordinate the disposition of properties along with balancing the heritage designation. I think it's a very important question that you've raised, and we will definitely follow up with staff. So thank you so much. Our next registered speaker is David Jeans.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for remembering the recent sudden death of our daughter. Certainly appreciate that. This is a personal view in support of this designation. I looked closely at this building some years ago, although I wasn't able to contribute to the report, unfortunately, but I was particularly interested in the name of the building because there was a lot of speculation that it was Scottish in origin. It's not. It comes from New Brunswick. E.C. Hayes, who built it, came from Kings County in New Brunswick, a rural area. He lived very close to Rothsay and may have been a teacher in Rothsay. And Hayes himself actually built a house, a detached house immediately behind this apartment building, which is still there, 137 Nepean Street, where he and his wife lived. He was still there in 1921. So I'm giving a walking tour for the Society for the Study of Architecture in Canada in this exact area, and I will be pointing out this building to the visiting architectural historians later this month. So just saying that I strongly support the designation. I understand the problems with the condition of a building like this, but that doesn't affect your decision on whether or not to designate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I don't see any raised hands. So thank you so much for your delegation. We can now move to questions for staff if members have any. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. A question and a comment. So the question first is, in the report, it talked about that the building has a curved courtyard. But in the comparable examples in books, the buildings usually have just a square courtyard. Is this perhaps a very unique example of the floor layouts for this type of building compared to others? Whether there's a different approach to how to do different size apartments in the building, or just a creative gesture by whoever the architect was?
Yeah, it is fairly unusual. Typically we see the sort of H-shaped or I-shaped apartment buildings in Centertown. We don't have anything to indicate why it is that way. I expect it might have been to get bigger units, and because the courtyard is quite small compared to some of the others. It's, for those who don't know, there might be a map there somewhere that illustrates its shape. I'm just trying to see it on the page. But I mean, to answer your question, I'm not sure how unusual it is. I would say anecdotally, yes, it's unusual in Centertown, but we're not sure why.
Okay, no, it's just an aspect of it being unique, might have boosted as a criteria an evaluation. And I think with further study, if you actually had access to the floor plates, plans, and analysis, it's something that someone could research later on to see how this was developed as part of that sort of whole program of these type of buildings. And the next point is just a comment in that, the reason we preserve these buildings, it points back to history. But this building type, has relevancy today, and in affordable housing circles, certain sustainable and affordable housing people are looking at this model of building as a way to provide denser buildings, which are divergent from what code has required for these type of buildings with multiple exits. This has a central hall entry, and which over time became not appropriate under code. But for whatever reason, it could be brought back as a model for new housing. And that said, this building was designed probably with larger apartments than you would get today. So it was rehabbed back to its original function. It'd probably be quite nice housing for people as opposed to taking it, chopping it up into little micro apartments, which make it less desirable to live in. Anyway, that's a comment about the past and the present type of needs. Thank you very much. Great research.
Thank you so much, Member Madigan. Member Borns.
Given Councillor Troster's comments, what are the characteristics that we want to preserve in this particular building?
If you go to document 5 of the staff report, it's on page 15, sorry, document 4. This document is a statement of cultural heritage value that staff are recommending that the committee endorse as part of this designation process. And it includes on page 16 a description of the proposed heritage attributes. So those are the 3-story massing with raised basement, the symmetrical front facade on O'Connor Street, the square plan with narrow interior courtyard on the west facade, the stone foundation, the flat roof, the red brick cladding, the various decorative string courses, the window openings, not the windows themselves as they have been replaced over time, the centrally located entrance as just discussed, and the metal balconies with curved railings. So these are the elements of the building that we are suggesting are those things that reflect its cultural heritage value.
So which of those would limit what you could do with the building? Like, are there uses for the building that we've considered?
Yes. So, I think with every designation that we propose, or existing designations that have been around for a long time, you'll see through this committee that property owners can make an application to alter the building to provide for a new use or to update it or whatever is appropriate. And staff work quite diligently to try to be as flexible as we can to ensure that these buildings have new uses, because without a use, what's the point of a heritage designation of kind of an empty old building? So we've written this with a future user, not a particular future user in mind, but with a future use of probably housing in mind. And so there's no interior features included. The windows themselves are not included. It's the shape of the openings. That being said, if somebody needed to change an element of that, there is a process that they can go through to do so.
Thank you so much, Member Legault.
Yes, hi. I'm curious about this relationship with Nepean Street, 137 Nepean Street. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. Yes, I'm curious about the relationship with 137 Nepean Street, where from what this gentleman was telling us was the architect from New Brunswick, E.C. Hayes, his residence. Is there any reference to the relationship between the actual apartment building that he constructed and then his residence in the heritage character statement or the designations? And is that building on the watch list? Or because also, I'm just curious if that's a common relationship to have the owner or the architect's residence in direct relationship to the apartment building.
I'm actually going to call on one of my colleagues who may be back here who did the research, either Anne or Kirsty. While they're coming up, I will say so I think the relationship of, a speculative development with the house next door, I would say I've seen it before. I wouldn't say that it's completely unique. But in terms of that relationship with E.C. Hayes, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so E.C. Hayes, he moved to Ottawa and he lived, I believe, on Spark Street downtown, and then he moved to the building at 137 Nepean. And then he was the owner of that building, and then he built the Rothsay Apartments. He wasn't the architect per se, he was just the owner, and then he managed the property.
Okay. The house was already constructed. He did not design and build that house in conjunction with the apartment building.
No, he lived at the front gabled house beforehand.
Okay.
And then in 1910, he built Rothsay Apartments.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions from members. Is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. So this report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on June 11th, 2025. Our next item is designation of the former Bell telephone buildings at 251 Besserer Street, 200 First Avenue, and 43 Eccles Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have a presentation from staff.
Good morning, committee. This is a presentation for the designation of the three former Bell Telephone Exchange buildings. There are currently three remaining. There were initially four of them. We're standing. Next slide, please. So the first one was the Rideau Exchange at 251 Besserer Street. It's a two-story red brick building with a raised basement located at the corner of Besserer and King Edward Avenue in Sandy Hill. Next slide. Next slide, I think for English only. I don't know if it's French. Okay, well. Okay. Well, the next one is the Carling Exchange at 200 First Avenue. It's a two-story red brick building in the Beaux-Arts style, also with a raised basement and symmetrical facade. You may note that this building is a near twin of the previous one on Besserer and Rideau, and so Besserer and King Edward. However, this one has 5 bays and the previous one has 7. This property is located in the glebe. I'll just pause and
I
wait for the
think we're just
presentation.
waiting for the presentation to come back up. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties.
Okay, looks like we're all ready. Next slide, please. And the third one is the Sherwood Exchange at 43 Eccles Street. It's a two-story red brick building in the Edwardian classical style, also with a raised basement. This property is located between Booth Street and Bronson in the West Centertown neighborhood. So the exchanges were locations where switchboards were operated to connect callers. A telephone subscriber who needed to speak with another subscriber would pick up the phone, which would connect them immediately to the switchboard. The operator would then connect the call by plugging the ringing cable into the relevant jack on the switchboard. If the number belonged to another region, the operator would transfer the call to the correct exchange, where another operator would connect the call. Next slide, please. The Bell Telephone Company of Canada was established in 1877 after Alexander Graham Bell received a patent for the Bell telephone on March 7, 1876. Bell transferred 75% of the patent rights to his father, Melville, who established the company in Canada. The first commercial telephone exchange was built in New Haven, Connecticut in 1878. The following year, Melville Bell sold the patent rights to William H. Forbes and his associates at the National Bell Telephone Company of Boston and joined with his son to work in Boston. On April 29, 1880, the Bell Telephone Company of Canada received the rights to construct telephone lines across Canada. Today, the Canadian company is known simply as Bell Canada. Ottawa shifted to dial-in technology in the early 1940s, meaning the switchboard operated exchanges were no longer required. Instead, dial-in exchanges were opened, which had machinery perform the technical operations of connecting the callers. The former Bell telephone exchanges have historic value for their direct associations with the Bell Telephone Company and the themes of development of telecommunications in Ottawa. Purpose-built as Bell Telephone Company switchboard exchanges in Ottawa, the exchanges provide telephone services to surrounding areas until the 1940s. The property symbolized a time of growth, technological advancement, and increased wealth in Ottawa. Next slide. The former exchange buildings also shed light on the history of women in the Canadian workforce. The Bell Telephone Company was established in 1877, and the first telephone exchange in Canada was built in 1878 in Hamilton, Ontario. By the year 1900, Bell hired exclusively women to work on switchboard operators, a position that demanded a high degree of patience, quick thinking, and physical exertion. The decision to hire only women emerged from an experiment done in 1888, which found that men were seldom polite and submissive to irate or rude subscribers, but matched insult for insult. To qualify, women had to be physically fit, at least a certain height, and had to prove good hearing and eyesight. Women who wore glasses were unhealthy and lacked the skills for enunciation, education, and penmanship. They were dismissed, which disqualified many immigrants and women without formal education. However, the Royal Commission revealed that even though these speculations, their operators' working condition did not necessarily reflect a higher class of women or result in higher wages. Although operators conducted important and demanding work, the starting salary was still only $18 a month and increased to $25 after 3 years of service. Next slide, please. Let's look at the architecture. As I noted earlier, the two buildings of Besserer and First Avenue are very similar to one another. So the one at 251 Besserer was constructed in 1912, a representative style of the Beaux-Arts architectural style, an expression that evoked grandeur, stability, and permanence. The central entrance features double front doors, a square window above with divided lights, and framed by decorative metal. This property has historic value as it was likely designed by prominent architect Albert John Ewart, who was the architect of Ottawa's first exchange on Queen Street, which has since been demolished, and also the known architect for the Carling Exchange at 200 First Avenue, which is a near twin of the Rideau Exchange. For 200 Fifth Avenue, also representative example of the Beaux-Arts style, and this property is known to be designed by John Albert Ewart. The third one is at 43 Eccles, two-story red brick building in the Edwardian classical style, aligns with the topology seen of many Bell telephone exchanges across the province. This building was designed by William John Carmichael, who was the chief architect for the Bell Telephone Company. He designed nearly 100 Bell telephone exchanges across Canada. So all three buildings meet 5 of the 9 criteria for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, and staff recommend that Council issue a notice of intention to designate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We do have a number of registered speakers, starting with David Jeans.
Again, personally, I thoroughly support this recommendation. I provided some comments during the research, which I won't repeat. But when I graduated from university, I worked on Bell Canada contracts for the first 3 years of my career, and I actually worked in the central telephone exchanges of Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. And that included working on one of those switchboards, the long-distance operators who were still not fully automated in the middle of the night after all the women had gone home, because I had testing work to do to verify some software. Anyway, these buildings are very important. Architecturally, as you've heard, John Albert Ewart was a very significant Ottawa architect. These are not his most important buildings. The First Church of Christ Scientist is probably #1, but he designed many, many buildings around Ottawa, including office buildings and so on. But so significant Ottawa architect, and the contextual importance of these buildings in understanding the history of telephone service is very important. Thank you.
We appreciate those comments. I don't see any questions, so thank you so much, David. The next registered speaker is Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa, and I believe that we received correspondence. I don't know if you need to speak at this time. Okay, thank you so much. And the next registered speaker is Jennifer Diaz of Safeline, and I believe she is only requested to speak if necessary. And I believe she's being promoted at this time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I'm with Lannister Homes, the owner of 4345 Eccles. This is our first time navigating this process. We are in attendance simply to follow along and based on the outcome to review and proceed with the next steps should we find ourselves in a position to challenge the decision. We just wanted again to just follow along. We don't have anything concrete to supply at this time. Just wanted to ensure we're part of this in the event that we need to move on with next steps. So thank you for hearing me out and I appreciate all the information that's been put together. Thank you again.
Well, thank you for joining us. I think Councillor Troster has a question for you.
Hi there. To clarify, hi, you said that you own the building on Eccles?
Yes, I work for Lannister Homes, who owns the building at 4345 Eccles.
Okay, and what's it being used for now? Is it a residential building?
Commercial.
It's commercial. Okay, so it's offices in there?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, the city staff and others will keep you privy to the process, but we appreciate you being here. Seeing that there are no other questions to this delegate, questions to staff. Are there any questions from members? Member Madigan.
A couple of comments or difference of interpretation. In the write-up on these buildings, for the first two, the red brick buildings by Ewart or potentially Ewart, they're sort of written up as sort of being just background buildings, not necessarily of a great architectural design. When I first came to Ottawa before getting into architecture, I just recall walking around. These are a couple of the buildings that really stood out to me just as sort of nice buildings before I even appreciated anything about architectural style. And after coming into architecture and researching about it, these two buildings stand out as a result of a higher quality, a talented designer compared to, say, a competent designer for the other third building, the brown brick building. So I would have put these as a higher level in the criteria for evaluation. As well, they're speaking of that these don't stand out as any quality for high level of craftsmanship or quality materials. These buildings sort of stood out to me in that they look like they're in very good condition. I think part of that is because they are built with very durable materials and very carefully, as opposed to some other buildings at the same time period, which were done with cheaper materials or less attention to the quality of construction. So again, I think that would be something that would have been changed in the criteria for approving things. And the last comment is the buildings do look like they're in very good condition, which I think is to the credit of the owners. Thank you very much. Particularly I think one is owned by the High Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, and the other one by the Chinese Embassy. In comparison to some other heritage properties owned by other, embassies and high commissions, these stand out as like making an effort to maintain these buildings, which I think should be noted. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments, Member Borns.
I note there are three nearly identical buildings, or at least two nearly identical buildings and one a little different. What's the policy and approach that we wish to take in terms of, unique buildings versus multiple copies of the same thing?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the interesting thing about these buildings in some ways is the fact that they're very similar because they're representing the growth of the city and the change in the city and their location. So it's not only about the architecture, it's about the fact that Bell Telephone was building these at a time that the city was growing and changing and needed to provide telephone services to different parts of the city. So there is no sort of policy or rule that says you can't designate two buildings that are exactly the same as one another. I think in this instance, it kind of makes sense that they're the same as one another because they were part of a broader building sort of program of Bell Telephones. And something similar, we designated 5 hydro substations a few years ago, and those also were not the same, but similar. Many of them were similar to one another. And it was the sort of same premise that from a locational perspective, they were built as the city grew, and they sort of illustrate that growth and change of the city. So would we designate, if there were 50, would we designate them all? Maybe not. But when there's two, it's staff's opinion that these merit designation.
Thank you so much for those questions. Are there any more questions from members? Seeing none, I really do appreciate the fact that staff has undertaken a lot of work and is continuing to do this work in a thematic format, which we talked about at the earlier in this term in terms of an approach. So we really appreciate this thematic approach. I think it's not just provides a lot of information, but it's also a more efficient mechanism to bring items forward. And I'd also like to recognize the fact that Her Excellency, the High Commissioner for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, was on the call observing but not delegating. Is this report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. So this report will be submitted to Council on May 28th, 2025. Our next item is designation of 323-327 Rideau Street. And I believe there is a technical motion from staff that will need to be moved by Vice Chair Plante.
I'll just read the therefore be it resolved because it is a technical motion. Therefore be it resolved that document 4 be replaced with the attached revised statement of value, amending the attribute references from poster cases to display cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for introducing that motion. And we do have a presentation from staff.
Good morning, Chair King, Vice Chair Plante, and Built Heritage Committee members. Today I'm presenting on staff's recommendation to designate 323 to 327 Rideau Street, the Bytown Cinema, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The subject property is a two-story purpose-built movie theater on the north side of Rideau Street between King Edward Avenue and Nelson Street in Lowertown. The building was constructed in 1947 as the Nelson Theater and operated as such until it was reopened in 1988 as the Bytown Cinema, which it continues to function as today.
I think we lost the presentation again, so I'll just wait for our staff to get that back up. Thank you.
Next slide, please. The Bytown Cinema was constructed during Ottawa's post-war cinema boom, when movie attendance in the theater business in Canada reached new heights. This rise was the catalyst for the construction of smaller-scale local theaters situated in residential areas known as a neighborhood movie house. The theater is a representative example of a post-war neighborhood movie theater with elements of the modern architectural style. The theater features typical elements of the post-war neighborhood movie house, including a large lighted marquee, a former exterior ticket booth, as well as two-story massing, which was typical of the neighborhood at the time of construction. Stylistically, the post-war neighborhood movie house often featured the modern style. The Bytown features elements of the modern style through its rounded profile, streamlined stone cornice, smooth brick cladding, and metal accents. The theater was designed by the prolific Toronto architectural firm Kaplan and Sprockman. Comprised of architects Harold Kaplan and Abraham Sprockman, the firm designed hundreds of movie theaters across Canada and was instrumental in introducing the modern style to the Canadian theater architecture. Local proprietor Hyman Berlin opened the theater as the Nelson Theater in 1947, serving as the neighborhood movie house for Lowertown and Sandy Hill residents. Berlin operated the theater for only a few years before leasing it to famous players in the 1980s. In 1988, local theater operators Bruce White and Jean Cloutier reopened the Nelson Theater as the Bytown Cinema. Since then, the Bytown has functioned as an independent repertory theater, screening cult, classic, foreign, independent, and alternative films daily. The theater serves as a gathering place for independent cinema and film community, as well as various groups and subcultures that use the Bytown as a community space. Next slide, please. As a post-war neighborhood movie house, the Bytown is historically and functionally linked to its surrounding neighborhoods and Rideau Street's commercial activity. The Bytown is also functionally linked to other neighborhood institutions and gathering places, including the former synagogue at 375 King Edward Avenue and the Rideau Library at 377 Rideau Street. The Bytown is a landmark on Rideau Street and in Lower Town. Its prominent frontage on Rideau Street and its iconic marquee distinguishes it from surrounding contemporary buildings. At night, the Bytown's lighted marquee makes it highly visible on Rideau Street, uniquely reinforcing its status as a historic and familiar landmark on its streetscape. In terms of consultation, staff have met with the owners to discuss the designation and answer questions about its implications. Staff have worked with owners to ensure clarity in the statement. I believe a motion is coming forward today to reflect those discussions. Staff have determined that the Bytown Cinema meets 6 of the 9 criteria for designation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We do have registered speakers, starting with David Jeans.
Sorry, I'm afraid I can't resist the personal notes. I support this. I was at the Bytown with my wife on Sunday. I was also there in 1959 for Ben-Hur, 1963 for Lawrence of Arabia, and Cleopatra, and other films like The Fall of the Roman Empire, My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, etc., etc. In fact, I saw Cleopatra 5 times there while I was in high school, including sitting through 2 consecutive showings, which you could do in those days. But in any case, it's a wonderful memory of Ottawa's cinema heritage. As one of really only 2 operating repertory cinemas in Ottawa, it performs a great service for the city here. I've organized a Welsh Film Festival at the Bytown Cinema 3 times over the past few years, and it's just very important to me, but I think more it's very important to the cinema history of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you do have a question from Vice Chair Plot.
Yeah, a bit of a lighter question. Would you say the popcorn at the Bytown has improved over the years, or has it?
Well, this year the bags are smaller.
That's actually true. That's true.
But every the popcorn is great. We didn't have it on Sunday, very rarely, because Sunday was their high tea show with scones from Sconewich and 2 choices of tea to accompany their afternoon matinee. So it's also a community resource in that events can be held there, and of course it holds all kinds of special events. The Sound of Music revival sing-along and costume event was marvelous, and there have been many like that. I haven't been to a Rocky Horror Picture Show there because I don't like things being thrown around while I'm watching a movie, but nevertheless, it's a spectacular place. And we work very well with the current management and appreciate everything they're doing. Thank you.
And you also have a question from Member Madigan.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your anecdote. I didn't read that in the report from the Heritage staff, but I suggest, and I sort of do it jokingly a bit, perhaps send a little email to the staff to append that to the file, because it was a very well documented report, which opened my eyes to the significance of this building. It wasn't technically on my radar until I read the report that, wow, this building has a lot of significance, which sort of goes beyond its sort of very simple facade, which compared to other historic theaters are more elaborate. So thank you to staff for eye-opening, but truly send your anecdote to the city for appending to the file, because I think that's very important information.
Yeah,
We have David's anecdotes in all of our files.
Yeah. I apologize for not contributing directly to the research for this report because I've had a lot of things going on the last few weeks. But in any case, it's a very special place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for those comments. It really demonstrates that that cinema is not just history, but living history that really has impacted our city over generations and hopefully for generations to come with this designation. We also received correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, and I know that Linda Hode is here, and I just wanted to ask if the committee is prepared to carry this report, whether you need to speak, Linda. No. Okay. Questions to staff then from members. Vice Chair Plante.
So I got one piece of correspondence about this, and I swear this is a very real question. So with the closing of the Main Street Library to Adesoke, I'm being told that bad movie nights will cease at the location there, and they want to know if staff will support bad movie night moving to the Byward Cinema and some sort of partnership with the city. I'm serious.
Not to be overly bureaucratic, but I think we'd have to take that one away.
I will
speak with our colleagues.
Absolutely. I just wanted to get that on the record that staff can look into moving bad movie nights to the Byward Cinema. So that was my only question. Thank you so much. I just wanted to share a quick memory that I have of the Byward Cinema. So my son was born in the fall, and he had like a lot of newborns had a lot of trouble sleeping, and it was winter and cold. As we were trying to get through that. So I would go to the matinee shows at the Byward Bytown Cinema, and I would put little earphones on him and just walk the halls up and down because it was dark, and he would take a nap and he would actually sleep that whole time. I saw so many movies during my maternity leave. Yeah, it's been a part of our family probably since I moved to Ottawa in 2004 and stuff like that. And sometimes they would see me come in for the matinee and just let me in, and I wouldn't have to pay because they would see that my son was in the carrier. So he's a lot bigger now and he sleeps until noon. But I just wanted to share that memory because it really is a special place, and I feel like it has evolved with so many families, not just downtown, but across Ottawa. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Plante. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. I will say the Rocky Horror at the Bytown is awesome. I appreciate having things being thrown around the theater. It's a wonderful experience. So I'm wondering why where does this fit within your work plan? Because I know that the department has been focused on thematic groupings, and I'm just wondering if this fits within a particular theme that the department has been focusing on for the past couple of years.
So thank you for the question. It doesn't fit in the same kind of vein as 3 Bell Telephone buildings, let's say, but we have been looking at all of Rideau Street. And so that's where this one falls. So you may remember last year there was a cluster, including the Plaza building and the Bay. And this is sort of as we're moving east, and there will be another bunch that we still have to look at. So this is more of a geographic cluster than a thematic cluster.
Perfect. Thank you. That's interesting. I don't have, unfortunately, the criteria, or not the criteria, but the CIHR in front of me. Is that inlay in the tile in the front that says Bytown part of what is proposed to be preserved?
Thank you. It is not original to the building. Oh, wait, sorry. The terrazzo on the floor.
Cool.
Yes, that the name of the theater in terrazzo is a heritage attribute.
Okay.
I thought you meant the stone that says Nelson Cinema or Nelson Theater and Bytown Cinema. That is not original to the building.
Fantastic. And then finally, the marquee out front is obviously not as durable, I would say, as the rest of the building. What is a maintenance plan for that? Like, how much can that change in order to preserve that it's there? Is the designation simply to ensure that there is a marquee of the same size there permanently, or to what extent do they have to preserve the actual structure that's there now?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. It's a great question. It's something that I think staff thought quite critically about. So if you look in the list of attributes, we have included the lighted marquee as an attribute, and the fact that it is vertical and that it does extend the height of the building. So I think, certainly this type of fixture would need maintenance and it would need some work over time. I think even this one that's there today has been modified, obviously, to change the name. So I think we've included some some flexibility there to speak to the presence of that marquee going forward.
Because some of the elements of that may, eventually rust out and things like that. So they have the flexibility to try to, okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Leeper. I don't see any other raised hands for questions for staff. So is the technical motion carried? Carried. And is the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you so much. So that report will be submitted to council on May 28th, 2025. Our next item is the designation of Église Saint-François d'Assise, as well as the Église Saint-Joseph d'Orléans under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and we will have a presentation from staff.
I can't believe these ones aren't designated already, like Wellington Street. It's wild.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and Built Heritage Committee members. Today, we're proposing the designation of Église Saint-François d'Assise at 1062 Wellington Street West and Église Saint-Joseph d'Orléans at 2757 St. Joseph Boulevard under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. Église Saint-François d'Assise is located on the southwest corner of Wellington Street West and Fairmont Avenue in Hintonburg. The site includes a stone church built between 1913 and 1915 with 2 uneven towers and a cruciform plan, and a stone wall built in 1902 delineating the original Capuchin Fathers property at 100 Duhamel Street along Fairmont Avenue and Duhamel Street. Next slide, please. Église Saint-François d'Assise is a local landmark for its architectural features, the church's sheer size, grand staircase and entrance, and its location prominently fronting on Wellington Street, lending to its imposing form at the center of Hintonburg. Its spire projecting to the skyline can be seen, and formerly its bells tolling can be heard for blocks around. Its stone construction, irregular setback to accommodate the street's curve, and religious function also define and support the late 19th and mid 20th century built character of Hintonburg Village and Wellington Street West. The church was designed by prominent architect Charles Brodeur of Hull, who significantly contributed to the ecclesiastical architecture of the Outaouais region in the early 20th century, as well as designing a range of public and commercial buildings locally. Église Saint-François d'Assise represents Brodeur's largest and most complex church in his Roman Catholic portfolio. Next slide, please. Église Saint-François d'Assise is representative of the Romanesque Revival style, which was popular in Canada from the 1840s to the early 1900s. The heavy formal style was used in institutional, religious, civic, and commercial buildings. The style is demonstrated by its grand massing, heavy stone construction, square towers, semicircular windows, rose windows, and an entrance with round arched doors and classical columns. The facades are original, displaying the building's high degree of architectural integrity, and a high degree of craftsmanship is illustrated by its repeating decorative designs in its masonry, belfries, and parapet, and the open concept nave without pillars demonstrates its high degree of technical achievement. Next slide, please. Église Saint-François d'Assise is associated with the Catholic Church, which has significantly contributed to many neighborhoods in Ottawa, including Hintonburg. The Capuchin Fathers, a Franciscan order within the Catholic Church from France, established the parish in 1890, and their property included formerly a 1891 church and a monastery, which has since been demolished, kind of where the community center is now, and the Fathers have remained associated with the current church. Église Saint-François d'Assise contributes to the greater understanding of the Capuchin Fathers and their predominantly French-Canadian Catholic congregation. The growth of the French-speaking Catholic population in Hintonburg in the late 19th to early 20th century stimulated the need for the construction of the second and current church. Overall, the building meets 9 of the 9 criteria for designation. Now my colleague will be talking about Saint Joseph.
Hi. So next slide, please. Okay, so the property at 2757 St. Joseph Boulevard includes a French Catholic church known as Église Saint-Joseph d'Orléans, a rectory, a cemetery, and a grotto. The property is located on the north side of the street in Ottawa's Orleans neighborhood. As you can see from the central photo, the property is quite large. I've put a red little star on where the church is itself, and you can see the cemetery takes up the vast majority of the property. Bilberry Creek also runs through the properties, which is where the treed line is going north and south. Next slide, please. The church is the second church constructed on the site after the original 1885 building was demolished in 1920 to accommodate a larger congregation. The current building was completed in 1922 in the Gothic Revival style and was constructed in limestone based on a cruciform plan with symmetrical facade and pointed arch windows. The building is attributed to Reverend Georges Bouillon, who was the architect for the diocese and designed many French Catholic buildings during his tenure. Much of the church interior was destroyed by fire in 1973, including many murals, sculptures, and windows. New colored glass windows were fabricated over the course of 20 years by Dutch craftsmen and installed in the 1990s. In recent years, the plaster was removed from the walls, revealing the stone beneath. Oh, sorry, next slide for the English. We're off skew. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. The interior also features a pointed arch vaulted ceiling, typical of Gothic Revival churches. The rectory is also the second building on the site. It was constructed in 1891, replacing an earlier 1885 wooden structure. The current rectory was built in Second Empire style with a mansard roof, dormers, and central entrance with portico. The exterior was modified in 1951 by removing the veranda and central Grand Bay. Next slide. The property is associated with the growth of the Catholic Church in Eastern Ottawa. Father Joseph Eugène Bruno Guigues was the first Archbishop of Ottawa, then known as Bytown, and wanted to expand the diocese. In 1849, Guigues invited Catholics from Lower Canada to settle in his parish rather than immigrating to the United States. Early Orleans settler François Dupuis approached the Archbishop in 1849 about establishing a mission in Gloucester Township, the area where Orleans would later develop. The first Catholic chapel in the area was constructed in the same year on land owned by Dupuis. The congregation grew over the next decade and by 1860 was large enough to support a resident priest, formalizing the creation of the St. Joseph Parish. Next slide. (2757) St. Joseph Boulevard has associative value because it yields information about the understanding of the large French Catholic community in Orleans. The first road connecting the village to Ottawa was completed in 1850. The idea was to establish lots along what was known as Ottawa Road, Montreal Road, and later and now known as St. Joseph Boulevard, in the hopes that settlers would purchase land along the main thoroughfare near the church. This would put the church at the heart of the budding village. Early French-speaking settlers François Dupuis, Luc Major, and Théodore Besserer played integral roles in the establishment of the village, parish, and naming of the area. Orleans would further develop in the 1960s as a predominantly suburban community with a high concentration of Francophone families. The property also has historic and contextual value, which lies in association with St. Joseph Boulevard and the development of the village of St. Joseph d'Orléans, now known as Orleans. With prominent frontage on St. Joseph Boulevard, with an imposing limestone construction, a tall spire, which is visible from a distance, the large property makes the church and property a landmark in Orleans and the surrounding area. And therefore, staff recommend that notices of intention to designate are issued for both properties. This one meets 7 of the 9 criteria, and Curtis is 1, and the Hindenburg is 9 of 9. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, and I think it's worthwhile to note that I think that might be one of the designated properties, might be the first time that we've reached 9 out of 9, which is just incredible. So in terms of this file, we did receive correspondence from the Hindenburg Community Association, and we do have a number of registered speakers. The first registered speaker is Richard Palmaville, the Chief Administrative Officer of the Ottawa-Cornwall Archdiocese.
Good morning, bonjour, committee members. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak to you. As was mentioned, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the Roman Catholic Episcopal Corporation of Ottawa Cornwall, basically, which is the civil corporation known in the Catholic circle as the Archdiocese of Ottawa Cornwall. I do want to thank the staff for producing a detailed historical description and obviously the work that they've done. But the reason I wanted to actually, be able to intervene today is to focus specifically on one line in the actual designation of 1862 Wellington and 2757 St. Joseph, the report. It is actually on page 11 under consultation. And the reason why I need to really flag this, it's actually the first line of the second paragraph. So if you have an opportunity to look at that in French, it's actually straggling between page 11 and page 12. There is a qualifier missing in that sentence after the verb are, which is, and I know this may surprise a lot of people, but it's the not that is missing. Because in reality, both the congregation and the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Ottawa Cornwall are not supportive of a proposed designation. Correct that in each parishes, a few individuals have shown interest in designation, but the leadership team, starting with the pastors in both parishes, and also the leadership team in each parishes and the Archdiocese of Ottawa Cornwall, are not in favor of actually obtaining another designation. It is important to note that we really wanted the committee to be aware of that aspect, even though the process, I'm sure, will be continuing, especially based on the criteria. And the reason is that the process currently underway really looks at the shell, the building of a community. It does not actually take into consideration the community living in it and the impact of such a designation has on the community. We did not ask for the designation, and the reason why we're not supporting this designation is fundamentally the overall long-term impact it has on the volunteer base, the work, the whole aspect of future type of projects having to go through, very additional specific, work that has to be done with the heritage staff. While we know that these buildings, we want to maintain them, there's an additional cost to basically that. And I want to bring your attention as an example to the city of Montreal that actually are struggling with these types of situation where they're adding a lot of burden. Parishes are actually closing. There's no heating in a lot of them, and there's no acquirer because of the actual tag. And that's something to take into consideration. We just have to look here at the city, one great designation. You just have to look at what we have at the corner of Cumberland and Murray. The other one as well is St. Bridget Church, which was basically closed in 2007. I mean, it's no longer a Catholic property. You just have to look at the actual, tower on the east side. You see the rust. This is basically, I'm sure if they don't have water leakage today, it's probably just a matter of time. Fundamentally, and I've had discussions with basically the Patrimoine Franco-Ontarien. Fundamentally, a heritage designation without significant financial support is just adding a burden, regardless of who the owner is. I mean, whether it's the Archdiocese or someone else. I know we may be dreaming of what is actually happening in Europe, but if you take as an example in France, okay. A lot of the religious churches, a lot of religious places are actually owned by Musée de France. Notre Dame Cathedral would not have been rebuilt, as fast as it was done if it was not the state that basically provided that. So I just want to basically make sure that people understand that it is adding an additional burden. I know on June 10th, you will be receiving a presentation from Azure Urban Development on a property at 254 Argyle, which is still owned by the Archdiocese. I mean, we're very lucky to actually have a developer who was stuck in there for the past 2 years trying to come up with a design to bring forward. But, a lot of developers would have basically walked away from doing anything from that property, a property that actually has no value to actually support basically the mission of the church. So at the end of the day, a heritage designation has a financial impact to the actual community. And that's why we're just not in favor of the actual designation.
Thank you so much for your delegation. And I know from what I've heard from staff, they are, thank you for the clarification. And staff is working on an amendment to the report to reflect your concerns. You do have a question from Vice Chair Plante.
Oui, beaucoup. Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me? Very well. It's rather a comment that I have than a question. I have a lot of Catholic heritage in my ward, Rideau Valley, as you know, especially with the University of Ottawa. And a lot of people called me, and I didn't know that people were so passionate about Pope Francis. The Westboro Church wears the name of the Pope who just died. So if there are funerals or something dedicated to the Pope, could you let me know? Because I'll put it in my book and I'll say that the church has been designated heritage because it's important for the Catholic in Ward 12. Thank you very much.
Merci. I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much for your delegation. The next registered speaker is David Jeans.
Sorry, I'm a bouncing ball here, but in any case, this is a very important designation. The building is a landmark. You can see it from everywhere, including driving on the Queensway. It has, I'm a member with Committee Member Quinn of the Doors Open Advisory Council, and the St. Francois d'Assise Church has been indoors open a number of times, very popular place. It's also the start point for Heritage Ottawa's walking tours of Hindenburg. So very, very prominent that way. I've been particularly interested in the architect, Charles Brodeur. Not very well known. Much of his output was in Hull. He's credited with at least 30 buildings, but this is by far his best building, and therefore designating it is really significant in terms of remembering the body of his work. He articled with a Montreal architectural firm that was a leader in Roman Catholic architecture, founded by Henri Maurice Perrault, and he really brought that knowledge and skill to many mainly Roman Catholic buildings in and around Ottawa and Hull. One of the reasons I was interested in him is I thought he might be the architect of the Visitation Monastery. That architect is not known, but the Visitation Monastery was closely associated with the Capuchins. They actually provided the priestly support for the nuns in the Visitation Monastery, and Brodeur had a significant period in his career where there aren't other buildings listed that he was working on at the same dates that the Visitation Monastery was being constructed. So unfortunately, no proof of that, but it was just an interesting speculation. So again, I thoroughly support designation of St. Francois d'Assise. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I don't see any hands raised, so thank you so much for your delegation. We also received correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, and I know that Linda Hode is here. I was just wondering if the committee is prepared to carry this report. Do you still want to speak to it? No. Okay, seeing that.
I just had one question, and particularly in the Orleans property, why are we looking at such a large designation when most of the description of the 9 of 9 relates to the building itself?
For the Orleans property, the property is very large, but the attributes are limited really to the building, to the to include the larger property without sort of limiting any alterations to that property going forward.
Well, for instance, would they require a heritage permit every time they did a burial?
No, they would not.
You're sure? And why would you expand the property to cover more than the church?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Why would you expand the designation to cover more than the church building?
That was at the request of the community association and those folks of the church that we were dealing with. They were looking for the entire property to be included in the designation.
And if I can add, under the Ontario Heritage Act, it's the property parcel that is designated. And then the elements of that parcel that are affected are outlined in that statement of cultural heritage value, which is what Ashley was referring to when she said, you know, we've included the language around, for instance, the cemetery is quite vague so that we had that exact conversation. We don't have to do a heritage permit every time somebody is buried there or a new headstone is put in or any of that sort of thing.
Thank you so much. We will continue with questions from members. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question of clarification. Are any elements of the interior of the if either church included in the designations?
Oh, I can respond to that. Yes, both churches have some interior features, but they are left quite broad to allow for alterations in the future.
Thank you. And also just to clarify, once a property is designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, it does become eligible for grants that funds available through your department and made allowed through the Ontario Heritage Act for owners of heritage designated properties. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Both properties would be eligible for our grant program, and we do have a newer stream which provides additional funding beyond the formerly $25,000 limit. So I believe it's $75,000. So our budget has increased for nonprofit buildings like this.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Member Legault.
My question was directly related to Member Quinn's question.
Okay, Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. More of a two comments. One is for St. Joseph. I think the part of the report talks about the in-house architect designing the church. Or I misread that.
Yes, that's correct. It's believed that Georges Bouillon, who was both priest and architect, designed the building. But I've not had any sources to confirm that for absolute certainty.
Is that fairly rare for churches in Ottawa?
I'm not sure, actually. He did a lot of churches in Ottawa. Many of them have been demolished or burned, unfortunately.
Okay.
But he does have some attributed to him in Ottawa locally.
Which goes to adding to the significance of this church if a lot of his other churches have been lost.
Yes, as some of them were the old convent, which is now in in the National Gallery reconstructed. That was one of his designs. Also, the the Baptist one we did last year. I forgot the name of it. The convent on Primrose and Empress. That was also his as well. That's one of the few standings still that was attributed to him.
Great, thank you. And second is just a comment. I feel a bit old and sort of tied, maybe a little bit. I have a preference for this church since I was married in it a number of years ago. I also live in Orleans, and in Orleans, there's not a lot of heritage stock. So, maintaining those buildings which have a history with the community for a long time and are literal landmarks, I think, are important to preserve and designate, even though there are some aspects of that as raised, which may burden the current owners or not. So again, thank you very much. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. I'm highly supportive of both of these designations. Obviously, I grew up in Orleans, and that church is part of my landscape. And of course, I live relatively close to the one in Hintonburg. I do miss the bells. I don't know why the bells don't ring anymore, but why
I can have
don't
a
the bells
comment
ring?
related to that.
I would love to hear. Yeah.
recently they've been taking out for renovations, but they're supposed to be reinstalled in the fall. So
Okay, fantastic.
I'm back.
We made special dispensation at the mosque that will be discussed on the same agenda today, where recently, on occasion, they have broadcast the call to prayers, and it's just made for a much more interesting ward. But the question I have is particularly with respect, I do have the description of heritage attributes in front of me this time. One of the heritage attributes of the Wellington property is its prominence as focal point in Hintonburg due to its visibility throughout the surrounding neighborhood from all directions, especially its towers. How is that treated with respect to developments that may go on around it? Is that a limiting factor when, 12-story towers or 16-story towers are being proposed on this fast intensifying strip? Is this heritage attribute a limiting factor in what those can be?
So Ms. Zenta may have something else to add, but when we protect a view or a landmark status of something, excuse me, it is basically impossible to regulate what happens outside of the designated parcel as it relates to that. What we can do is, if there were something proposed quite close to it or that was going to have a potential adverse impact, would be to assess that impact through a heritage impact assessment as part of the development process. And so we would look at ways of mitigating it, but there would be no restrictions related to the height of a new building adjacent to this, let's say, in terms, if it was in compliance with other city policy.
I'm interested in why it is included as an attribute when it is very difficult to police, and whether or not that doesn't raise expectations on the community's part.
I would suggest that it's a very important attribute that we would like to protect if we can. But it would also be about not building something in front of the church, or, you know what I mean? So there are elements on the property that we could that could be regulated related to the development that would protect that attribute. And then it also does give us that ability to assess impact and look at ways to mitigate that impact.
Okay. The other attribute that you've listed is the location, deep setback, and orientation on Wellington Street West. And that is very interesting. You couldn't put a corner store at the corner of Fairmont and Wellington, for example, because that would interfere with the setback. Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for looking at this one.
Thank you so much for the comments. And I don't see any other hands raised, so based on the delegation that we have, we do have a technical amendment that will be introduced by Vice Chair Plante.
Thank you so much, Chair. It's just a quick correction to both the English report and the French report, so I'll read the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that the second paragraph in the consultation section be amended to clarify that the property owner is not in support of the proposed designation. English report, page 12. Both the congregations and the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Ottawa Cornwall are not supportive of the proposed designation. Staff have worked with the property owners to identify important features of each building. French report, pages 11 and 12. Les deux congrégations et l'Archdiocèse catholique romain
Both congregations and the Roman Catholic Diocese does not recommend, or it does not agree with the designation, and it's about to carry important characteristics of both buildings. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is the amendment to the report carried?
Carried.
And is the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. So this report will be submitted to City Council on May 28th, 2025. The next item before us is designation of 251 Northwestern Avenue. There is a staff presentation.
Good morning again. Now I'll be presenting on 251 Northwestern Avenue, also known as the Ottawa Mosque, and we're recommending it for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. "251 Northwestern Avenue is a two-story, brown brick-clad, irregular-shaped building with a dome and minaret. The building was constructed between 1973 and 77, with the minaret added in 1979 and an addition in 1996. The building is located in Champlain Park, on the east side of Northwestern Avenue, north of Scott Street and the Transitway, and west of Tunney's Pasture." Next slide, please. 251 Northwestern Avenue is the earliest mosque in Ottawa and one of the earliest purpose-built mosques in Ontario. It is a unique and rare expression of a modernist place of worship as the only modernist mosque in Ottawa. The building is characteristic of the modernist style with its simple form and use of contemporary construction materials. It is also representative of the contemporary mosque with traditional Islamic architectural features, including its characteristic dome, minaret, and prayer hall with a square plan. The building is associated with the Ottawa Muslim Association, a grassroots organization that was founded in 1962 to serve the Muslim community in the National Capital Region. One of their early goals was to build a purpose-built mosque, which they accomplished with the construction of the Ottawa Mosque. The OMA operates the Ottawa Mosque and its religious services, as well as a library, educational program, and several social services. 251 Northwestern Avenue has associative value because it yields and has the potential to yield more information about Ottawa's early Muslim community from the 1950s onwards. Next slide, please. 251 Northwestern Avenue is functionally linked to its surroundings as the property was strategically selected for its central location adjacent to the community's former meeting place, its proximity to workplaces and public transit. Finally, 251 Northwestern Avenue is a landmark in Ottawa due to its prominent location north of Scott Street and is highly visible of its iconic architectural features, including its minaret and dome, and can be viewed from a distance. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have registered speakers, starting with David Jeans. Oh, and I'm seeing that he's indicated that he does not need to speak to this item. We also have Linda Hode registered for Heritage Ottawa. Just wanted to determine whether you needed to speak. And I do know that the vice president of the Ottawa Mosque was registered to speak, but unfortunately could not attend today. Are there any questions to staff? Seeing none, is this, oh, there is.
Just a quick thank you to staff for looking at this one. And I'm wondering, next to it is the old United Church. So at some point, the Muslim community was meeting in the old, I think it was a United Church next door, but while they were constructing, and now the mosque owns that former property, and it's now the Hall of Peace. Is that Hall of Peace interesting from a heritage perspective at all, or did you take a look at it?
Yeah, so that's correct. When the OMA was established, they were beating in people's homes and basements, and then they first moved into the basement of the United Church during construction, and they rented that. And then, as you said, they did take it over. From a heritage perspective, we looked at predominantly just the mosque for this parcel, just because it was purpose-built for that purpose, versus the United Church was I don't know, purpose-built for the United Church, and they took it over. So in that sense, we decided to focus predominantly on the main building.
I tend to agree, and I wouldn't be putting a ton of pressure on you to designate the one next door, but it's an interesting history. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very interesting file to look at. I worked on a relatively recent mosque in Ottawa, which was a very fulfilling experience. It made me realize that, you know, communities are very similar, having worked on other like Catholic and Protestant churches and working with communities. And the other interesting thing is that this is the community that helps build the building itself, they contribute to it. And the note from in the presentation was it was built over time and added to as you had funds, which was the experience of the mosque I worked on. Where I want to go to is there's a note about the architect, not much information. Did you have time to talk to anyone who maybe remembered engaging the architect to understand why the community engaged him or to get more information about the architect?
I did look into the architect. I'm not recalling his first name at the moment, but it's Anwaz, and he was a Pakistani architect that moved to Toronto, I believe, in the 60s. And so he was based there. And from what I could tell, he only built the Ottawa Mosque. And then he was involved in some housing competitions as well in Toronto. So it doesn't seem like he practiced much in Canada, but they reached out specifically to him because he was part of the Muslim community, and I believe that's why he chose him.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate the report and the dimensions of the reports that we're seeing before us. I think there's great symmetry between the designation of French Catholic churches as well as mosques, and we appreciate seeing these items come before a committee. Is this report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. So that report will be submitted to City Council on May 28th, 2025. The next item before us is repeal of bylaws designating 38 through 44 Clarence Street, 520 Queen Elizabeth Driveway, 1518 Sittsville Main Street, and the Lemieux Island Bridge under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is no presentation on this item, but we did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, and Linda Ho did indicate that she wanted to speak to this item.
Thank you. It's a fairly quick question, which is sort of implied in the in the comments we sent in. I just wondered if we might get an answer. Basically, it's 1518 Stittsville. It's a vacant lot. And I don't know whether there is any protection of any sort of the of what can be built on that property. The 3844 Clarence Street, of course, is in the Heritage Conservation District, so there are some controls over what could replace that parking lot. So I guess I'm just saying, is there anything, is there a secondary plan for Stittsville Main Street? Something that would, the building itself that is no longer there, I did look at, I guess, Google Street View. It was quite a stunning building. It's too bad it's gone, but I understand why the designation would be repealed. And I just say, is there any hope for controlling or inspiring a replacement building?
Well, we appreciate the question. We have no problem relaying that to staff during members' questions. So thank you, Linda, for the comment and the question.
Perhaps I should ask Councillor Gower.
And seeing no other registered speakers, questions to staff, and I suppose we could just relay the question from Linda to staff to answer.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, certainly Leslie and I were discussing, and after the loss of the building and the potential repeal, no, there would not be any heritage protections in place at the property or the surrounding area. We are familiar with a community design plan in place for Stittsville, so that could offer some direction to future developments there. But unfortunately, we didn't have anything that came to mind that would offer what Ms. Hode was referring to. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate that answer. And I think Ms. Hode also had noted that she would probably reach out to the member of council that represents Stittsville, and that would make a tremendous amount of sense in terms of the way forward. So we do appreciate the question, and we appreciate the answer. I don't see any other questions to staff. So is the report carried? Carried. So thank you so much. That report will be submitted to council on May 28th, 2025. Our next item is a presentation on the Heritage Watch list update. This dovetails with a recent workshop that we had on properties that are subjected to demolition by neglect. And in order for us to receive this presentation, it does require a motion to suspend the rules to hear this verbal update. And I believe that Vice Chair Plant has that motion.
Whereas the regular meeting of the Built Heritage Committee were canceled in March and April, whereas the Built Heritage Committee last received a verbal update on the Heritage Watch list in December 2024, be it resolved that the Built Heritage Committee suspend pursuant to Section 1(2) of the Procedure Bylaw the requirement for a report under Section 83(4)(a) of the Procedure Bylaw in order to receive a staff presentation with up-to-date information on the Heritage Watch list. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much. Is that motion carried? Carried. Thank you so much. So staff can proceed with the presentation.
I'll just wait for the slides to come up. Thank you. Great. So as was mentioned, this is I'm going to start calling it a regular update to the committee, perhaps, on the status of the Heritage Watch list. Over the last year or so, committee members have made it clear that they'd like more information on the watch list on a regular basis. So through discussions with the chair, we are aiming to do this twice a year now. So once now and then likely again in the fall. Today's presentation will give you an overview of the current status of the list, all of the properties on the list, not in great detail because there's too many, but then also an overview of some of the recent initiatives that I did speak about at my last update in December that we've been working on. Next slide, please. So since the December 2024 update, we have removed 2 properties from the list as a result of demolition. 16 properties have been added that have been identified in a variety of ways. Some of them being identified by staff, some of them being city-owned properties that we actually didn't have on the list that probably should have been on the list. And so now we're up to 47 properties total on the list, and 11 of those are diplomatic or foreign-owned, which I will speak about a little later. Next slide, please. So for the purposes of this presentation, we've kind of divided the properties into categories being sort of those we're considering kind of stable. They are vacant, but they're appropriately mothballed. We don't have any major concerns. There aren't a lot of calls to bylaw and regulatory services about these properties. So we have commercial units on Bank Street at 152 Bank. This is a newly added property. 8 Briarcliff Road, 552 Booth Street. This is the Booth Street complex, which should be undergoing redevelopment sometime in the future. 590 Broadview Avenue is the Broadview Public School. 501 Cole Avenue is a property many of you may remember was recently designated and is the subject of an ongoing appeal. 306 Sear is a city-owned property in Vanier. All of these properties are in stable condition. Next slide, please. Again, we have 1495 Heron here, which is the recently designated Federal Study Center Campanile campus, also owned by Canada Lands Corporation, or Canada Lands Company, sorry. Several houses in Rockcliffe Park that have been on the list for some time. 590 Hazeldean Road, you will be familiar with the Bradley Craig Barn. And then the newest one on here is 3131 Jockvale, which is the Jockvale Schoolhouse, also owned by the city and in the process of disposal by the city. Next slide, please. The final slide of sort of stable properties is 379 Metcalfe Street in the Centertown Heritage Conservation District, 143 Murray Street in Byward Market. We have 60 des Oblates. This is the Deschâtelet building in Ottawa East, which is planned to become a new school at some point. 111 Laurier Avenue. This is actually a vacant lot, but it's got a partially deconstructed or constructed building on it in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District, and 460 Wilbrod. Okay, so that sort of summarizes the stable properties. Next slide, please. The next batch are ones that committee members will be familiar with. 287 Cumberland Street, this is the two remaining walls of Our Lady School in Lower Town. 325 Elgin Street is St. Mark's Church. 330 Gilmore Street is the former Ottawa Board of Education building at the corner of O'Connor and Gilmore. 114 Richmond Road, which is the Sisters of the Visitation Convent. This one is actually for sale at the moment through the receivership proceedings related to Ashcroft. 173 Huntmar is a farmhouse in Stittsville, and then the McGee House at 1119 Wellington Street West. So these properties are on this list because we have either ongoing issues with the property owners or with the properties. We are having trouble getting them into compliance, or we have ongoing calls related to them. I'll speak a little bit in more detail about some of them a little later when I talk about some of the proactive engineering reports we undertook in the fall and early winter. But basically, these are ones that we see as these are the highest priority for us to try to get some action on because they are at risk of, it is demolition by neglect, and they're at risk of being demolished, I believe. Next slide, please. And then these are the diplomatic or foreign-owned properties. For those who've been on the committee for some time, you know that these can be a challenge for the city in terms of enforcement. I think as a member of the committee mentioned earlier, as it related to two of the Bell Telephone buildings, which are owned by high commissions or embassies, most of the heritage buildings owned by foreign governments are extremely well maintained, and we're lucky that we have that presence in Ottawa to take on some of these very big and challenging properties. We have a few that are less well maintained for a variety of reasons. A number of them are houses in Rockcliffe Park. So you can see here 488 Acacia, 699 Acacia, 6 Coltrane Place. Those are all in Rockcliffe. 46 Cartier Street is just down the street here, the former Embassy of Syria. Next slide, please. We have a number of others in Rockcliffe. So Lansdowne Road, we have 187 and 190 Lansdowne Road, 191 Mariposa, and 240 Coltrane. And then 58 Glebe Avenue is in the Glebe. The challenges with these properties vary depending on the property owner, what the situation is with the with the foreign government, sorry. So for instance, 190 Lansdowne Road, it is, I would consider, stable. It is undergoing renovations. It is planned to be reoccupied. Whereas some of these other ones like 46 Cartier, which was the Embassy of Syria, as you can imagine, that one is a challenging one for the city to even have correspondence with the government, I guess. I'm going to say the government. So these ones present their own unique challenges, but they aren't all, I would say, at risk. Some of them are more at risk than others. Next slide, please. We also have a number that are on the list that have heritage permits issued for them, and work in many cases is underway. 259 Clemma was just approved by this committee a few months ago. That one will be under construction soon, if not already. 125 Lakeway, same thing. 70 Nicholas, if you've been by the Rideau Center lately, you can see that that one is well underway, an extremely interesting project to watch happening. Onagum Street, this is the ruins of the former Hintonburg pumping station that the city is currently in the process of revitalizing and restoring to be a really interesting piece of public realm along the river, and that should be opening later this year. 70 Richmond, if you've been by the corner of Island Park Drive and Richmond Road lately, you've seen this building up on stilts on the other side of the road. It will be relocated back to its home as the development on the other side proceeds. 352 Somerset, arguably the poster child for this list, does have a heritage permit issued on it and is in the very final stages of its planning approvals and building permit issuance. We are cautiously optimistic. Councillor Troster is not she's more cautious than I am, perhaps, about this work proceeding in the near future. The same thing with 35 William Street. This has an issued heritage permit and a building permit and is in the process, hopefully, of beginning construction soon. 127 York is a newly added property probably about a year ago. And we've just had some great success with the property owner in issuing a heritage permit for some work to do some restoration work, to build a new front veranda, and get this building occupied again with commercial tenants. Next slide. And then there are a variety that have heritage permits but have not been demolished yet. So they are approved for demolition but haven't been demolished. 7 Crescent Road, you may remember, had a fire last year. Same thing with 79 Geeg. And then committee members will be very familiar with 227 to 237 St. Patrick Street. All of these properties are vacant, awaiting demolition, but it is incumbent on the owner to undertake that demolition unless there is a reason for the city to do so. Okay, next. So that's sort of the tour of the list at this stage. And if members have questions about specific properties, I can try my best to answer them. And if we don't have answers, we can get you answers later. But I do have kind of a quick overview of what we've been working on in recent months. So if I could get the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So we had kind of 3 initiatives that we've been undertaking, and these are all as a means of trying to further bolster the efforts of our sort of integrated internal team of bylaw regulatory services staff, heritage planning staff, and building code services staff. Because we know that we brought forward a number of demolitions last year, and we know that, you know, the efforts that they're not always being successful. We're having some small successes and then some very challenging situations still. And so we're looking for ways to try to bolster the tools that we have. So the first one was that we undertook some proactive engineering assessments. So we hired an engineer with experience in heritage buildings to come out and do some kind of high-level assessments with us recently. If you could go to the next slide, please. We conducted assessments of 10 of the properties on the watch list in November and December, and we did this with our integrated team of heritage planning, bylaw, and building code services staff. And we went out and visited all of the properties, and we spent 2 days with the conservation engineer visiting the sites. They submitted to us a brief engineering report on each of the properties with recommendations for next steps. So through that, we issued a number of notice of violation. So those are things like boarding up the building, or there's debris on the property, that sort of thing, just kind of general property standards. And then we issued a number of orders for condition assessments. So this is particularly relevant for 330 Gilmore, 114 Richmond Road, where we are seeing kind of ongoing issues and concerns from the structural engineer about the condition of the building. So the process of those orders is ongoing, but we did issue a number of orders to sort of require that broad condition assessment to give us an idea of where things are at with the building. And then following, when we receive that, or if the city has to undertake it, we will, we'll have to see what the follow-through work is coming out of those assessments. One of the challenges, of course, is that it still is sort of an exterior-only view. And then there were some instances where we sent owners to letters to owners where we saw that work had happened without a heritage permit, just to make them aware that heritage permits were required, and try to open up those lines of communication with some of these property owners who may not have been aware that they were even on the watch list. Next slide, please. The next of the three initiatives that we recently undertook was a meeting with our colleagues at Global Affairs Canada. We held this in January. It was sort of the initial meeting of what we expect will be a series of meetings to sort of share information about this program that the city has in the Heritage Watch List, the tools that we are currently using, how we're dealing with foreign-owned and diplomatic properties, and primarily the challenges that we're facing. And sort of we were aiming to educate our colleagues, but also seek some help from them in terms of even small things they could do. One of the challenges we often face is trying to make contact with these property owners. And so Global Affairs Canada has offered assistance in helping us make those connections. And our next kind of range of meetings is to meet in smaller groups with representatives for each of the individual countries that we are having particular challenges with. So that work will be ongoing, I expect. Global Affairs, we're also planning to work with them to develop kind of an information package that they could share with these property owners to sort of educate them about the fact that they own a heritage building. Here are your obligations. Here's who you can contact, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And then the final piece is the At-Risk Heritage Building Workshop that we held on March 31st. Number of you were present at the workshop. We had an in-person meeting with community members representing several of the heritage conservation districts around the city. Heritage Ottawa, the chair and the vice chair were here, and some members of Build Heritage, as well as staff from bylaw, building code, and heritage planning. Next slide, please. We went into this workshop with a very open mind about the fact that this is we have a lot of tools. Are we using them to the best of their advantage? I'm not sure. Are there other tools that we haven't thought of? What are the consequences of these issues in our communities? And so we had sort of four brainstorming questions. So one was what are the biggest challenges when you have vacant buildings or buildings that are experiencing demolition by neglect in your community? We did provide sort of an overview of the current system to participants so that they could help us identify the gaps. So the first was challenges in turn. I won't read all of these, but a lack of understanding in the community about heritage, the financial implications, the foreign-owned properties were raised, and then just sort of broader concerns about the impact of these types of properties on broader community appearance and the way people value their communities. Gaps in the system, I think access to information was seen as a challenge by community associations. Lack of financial incentives was a challenge. The city's inability to inspect the interior of the properties, and that the fines and the legal process are cumbersome and take too long. Next slide. So some new, and then one of the questions we asked was, do you have any new ideas? And I should have prefaced this by saying, I've kind of just put this all out here. And I'll talk about next steps at the very end, but this is the raw data that was collected from participants. So it's what we heard at the workshop. So zoning incentives to try to incentivize the adaptive reuse of historic buildings. Perhaps a new tax incentive that isn't tied to development or housing. Our current community improvement program is tied to development of a building. Additional housing units have to be added in order to avail of that program. Disincentives. So this was around the idea that if somebody were to demolish a building related to demolition by neglect, that they wouldn't be able to sort of upzone the property or get additional development potential that would help them make money. There was a suggestion of could we apply the vacant unit tax to all vacant buildings? Could we reduce the time frame for the tax sale of a property where a property owner is in tax arrears? Increase inspection frequency, heating and ventilation. There were a number of questions and comments about the fact that the city doesn't often undertake the work and charge back the owner, and that's perhaps something we should be doing more aggressively. That we should be more proactively identifying at-risk properties rather than sort of reactionary identification, either when something happens or, you know, somebody sees it. A number of people suggested bringing back the mayor's task force and then creating site-specific frameworks for some of these challenging properties. So similar to the 1495 Heron Road design guidelines that we brought forward with the designation, could we look strategically at all of these properties and try to make them more appealing for redevelopment? That would include the adaptive reuse of the property. Next slide. And then just to continue, financial disincentives, so increased fees, increased penalties. There was a discussion about the loss of materials, so a climate change tax from the demolition of these buildings, increased penalties if owners own multiple properties, and then looking at a broader range of other financial incentives that could be provided, pushing other levels of government to create financial incentives, not just bearing the burden at the municipal level. Next slide. And then the final question we asked participants was about the criteria that are used for adding properties to the watch list. So right now, properties are added if they're vacant and considered to be, they're vacant and they're a heritage building, basically, vacant and designated. But there are a number of properties, for instance, the properties on St. Patrick, which up until last year or so were occupied, but clearly were at risk for some time. And they weren't on the watch list because they were occupied, but there is a fine line of trying to figure out when a property is considered at risk or when a property is, for instance, a property owner maybe can't afford to maintain the property in perfect condition. We all know how expensive it is to keep up your property, and we don't want to penalize people who maybe just can't afford to fix their barge board this year, but maybe they're going to do it next year by adding them to a watch list. And so these were some of the ideas. Problematic properties that receive a high volume of complaints through bylaw, city-owned properties that are vacant, partially vacant buildings, including storefronts, and that we should look at being expert informed. So if an engineer deems it to be at risk, then we should add it, even if it's occupied. Okay, that was a lot. One last slide and then I'll stop. Next steps. So that was kind of the raw data from the workshop. We have, our next steps are for us to review all of this information, and our plan is to meet as a group and kind of go idea by idea, figure out who we need to talk to internally, figure out which, if any, of these ideas are feasible, and then report back to the community on our findings. Continue to work with Global Affairs on property-specific issues and the general education piece, and then undertake our next update to this committee in Q4 2025. And I apologize for the length. I guess that's the problem of having done a lot in the last few months.
No, don't apologize. We're very thankful for this work. I know that many of us, in terms of the elected officials here, we hear often from our constituents, especially around properties that are, experiencing neglect and demolition by neglect, and it's a very important issue. We do, before we go to questions from members, we actually do have a delegation. So Ken Grafton and Mark Denhez from the Rideau Wellington Group, we'd like to invite them to speak. I don't know if they're online or if they're in the room. In the room, perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I'm Mark Dahe. I am here for Rideau Wellington Group, a policy consulting firm, notably on the reuse of buildings. I've served as a lawyer and adjudicator with the senior management group of the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I'm president of Historic Ottawa Development, Inc., HODI for short. Our topic this morning is what is it that helps push properties onto your heritage watch list in the first place. We invite you this morning to step back and ask, what are the causal factors? Now, the Foreign Tech Canada Research Institute reported, and I quote, "Most buildings are demolished for reasons that have nothing to do with the physical state of the structural systems. Our overriding conclusion is that no meaningful relationship exists between structural material and average service life. In Ottawa, CMHC reported that almost 30,000 dwellings were built before World War II, roughly 1 in 13. 38% of them need minor repairs and 12% need major repairs. So almost half need some visible repair. And some say, blame it all on real estate economics. It's intrinsically cheaper, everybody knows, to replace a building than to fix it. And we reply, that may even be true sometimes, but it's not the whole story. Rideau Wellington assembled the evidence. Between 1925 and 1948, Canadian officials published a series of denunciations of any building over 50 years old as obsolete on what one leading official called the irresistible march to the scrap heap. Today, that would mean any building built before 1975. Another told audiences during World War II that it was, quote, a comparative misfortune that Canadian cities have not been leveled by the war yet. To give more push, they inserted 4 major tax incentives for demolition, like saying you could claim the entire book value of the building at the time as a tax deduction because the building got lost. It got lost. And then there are the disincentives, pardon me, for sustaining the building stock. The legislation omitted any definition of claimable repairs. So officials introduced their own criteria, like disqualifying, quote, expenses that extend the useful life of your property, or put it into a suitable condition for use, or improve them too much, like asbestos remediation. And although CRA can normally issue advance rulings on prospective tax treatment, here CRA explains that it refuses to explain except after you've finished the work. Meanwhile, at GST, one key way to create housing is secondary suites. Units inserted into a basement or attic, often the fastest and cheapest way of creating new housing. There are no foundations to pour, no water mains to connect. Normally, any new unit is eligible for the GST new housing rebate. But here, the GST treats its location within an existing residential building like a contaminant, disqualifying it. It's the only category of new housing disqualified from the rebate. Another overt intervention is called substantial renovation rebate, but only if you tear out at least 90%. Repair is unacceptable. Canada is the only known country on earth which disqualifies a taxpayer from a rebate for not producing enough demolition waste. Now, the city wasn't spared. That was the same heyday as the car culture. So the city of Ottawa at the time incentivized parking lots. To this day, the city taxes parking lots 34% lower than a commercial property of identical assessed value, 43% lower than an office property, and 46% lower than an industrial property. So in conclusion, first, we hope for your interest in how Canada got into this situation. It's Rideau Wellington's business to show you those policy mistakes of the past which live on today, and identify the legislative changes to eliminate the pro-demolition bias in our existing tax system. And second, we suggest that the City of Ottawa call for proper public re-examination and update of this critical but antiquated and counterproductive policy framework. The building industry has been calling for a level playing field for 20 years. but more voices are needed to be added. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. You reached time, and I was going to ask initially about your thoughts around the city and how it should respond, and you actually did do that. So we appreciate that. I see that there are questions from Councillor Leeper for you.
Not so much a question. I'm just wondering, can you send us your comments?
Okay. How many comments would you like, Mr. Lee?
So you were reading from a script. Can you send at least me that? But I suspect if you send it to the committee coordinator, he can distribute to every member.
Why don't I do that?
Thank you.
Yes, we would appreciate those comments. I don't see any other raised hands, so thank you so much. Sorry, Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Mark. Thank you for your presentation, Mark. Good to see you're still around doing your thing. Off the top of your head, like based on what you recommend and also what Leslie brought forth as comments from the different workshops, what might be the top action that could be taken to help improve getting buildings occupied enough that vacant?
At which tier of government? Federal, provincial?
Provincial. Sorry, municipal level, since it's municipal here.
At the municipal level, I would certainly be looking at okay, I'll back up a second. We heard about incentives and disincentives. I am uncomfortable with incentives and disincentives when we already have a system which is biased. We're not the only country that has a problem like this. The United States has the same issue, and it's been called the same thing. So what you have here is something where the first priority is to make sure we have at least a level playing field. The treatment of parking lots is not a level playing field. What else we could do? Well, yes, we could certainly look at questions that Ms. Collins raised, I think, very eloquently. That shopping list that we heard out of the workshop is, I think, the ideal place to start. And I totally concur with the various recommendations that were put forward there.
Thank you.
Now, one last point, and that is, it doesn't take a perfect package to incentivize a property owner to move in one direction or another. All it takes is to tweak the math enough that it outperforms the competition. What does that mean? That means the first and original problem is, how do you calculate the relative economic benefits of tearing down a building and replacing it versus fixing the existing structure? There wouldn't be a $160 billion industry if the answer were invariably tear the critter down and replace it. The renovation industry in Canada is the largest component of Canada's largest industry. Okay, that's number one. Number two, in 1987, the United Nations turned its back on planned obsolescence and all those economic theories from the 20s and 30s in order to bring on this thing they called sustainable development. In the year 2008, the Canadian government, through the Federal Sustainable Development Act, enacted legislation that said at Article 1, sustainability means the capacity to maintain something indefinitely. The problem is we never did it. So if I may switch into French for a moment, what is first required is a prise de conscience.
Take awareness.
This is a major issue. It is the largest collection of tangible assets owned by Canadians. And we have to get serious about coming up with an entirely new perspective on it. That's it.
Thanks. I think your last points can speak to an earlier comment I made to some of the buildings that were designated the telephone exchange buildings, which are built with quality construction, quality materials, very well and very durable buildings, which have survived to this time, partly because of that. But that predates the change in sort of how one perceives economics and buildings. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those questions, and thank you so much for your delegation and comments. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And now we move to questions by members. Member Legault.
Yes, this goes back to the beginning of your presentation, where you refer to two properties as being city-owned. I think one is 3131 Jockville, and then I'm not remembering what the other address is. And I'm just wondering, from a city perspective, what the particulars are going on there. And I ask because I know in past meetings, one of the recommendations or one of the ideas for saving heritage is actually that we have more city-owned and federally owned buildings to protect these. But now, in this case, we find two on the watch list. So I'd like to hear more from the city perspective on this.
Thank you. The two properties that are on the watch list are the 3131 Jockvale and 306 Sear Avenue in Vanier. They are vacant because they're in the process of being disposed of by the city. So that they were occupied up until quite recently. And that goes to sort of that broader conversation about city-owned assets, and sort of the city looking at its portfolio of properties and determining properties that we have uses for.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is that even though it does have a heritage value, because there's no immediate sort of occupant use, the city as well is finding that you have to demolish these properties. Is that correct?
No, these properties will be sold or
Okay.
when I say disposed of, sorry, I mean leaving the municipal sort of inventory of properties, and they will be sold with their heritage designations in place.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. If I understood correctly, the properties on St. Patrick Street for which demolition permits were approved are still standing. But when we approved that, as I recall, it was because you're posing a danger to the public, which means basically as we approved the permit, they should have been knocked down the next day because they're a safety hazard. Why are they still standing if that was the case?
I'm actually, I think, Patrice, are you still here? I'm going to ask Patrice Dumais from Building Code Services to come up to help me with this question. Just from the heritage perspective, yes, we agree. I shouldn't say the heritage perspective. From the city perspective, we had reports that indicate that the buildings, at least one of them, was in very bad condition, and could not be fixed and was a safety hazard. But maybe Patrice, you could provide whatever the latest is.
Thank you, Chair. The properties are privately owned. From a building code services standpoint, we've issued some orders and are currently working through the process to get this resolved in a timely manner.
I find this deeply concerning. To me, it seems the system has been gamed to push for those demolition permits to be issued right away, based on the aspect that the buildings were posing as a safety hazard to the public. To me, it means that maybe it wasn't so urgent. And there's other mechanisms, as we understand from other presentations and discussions, the city can go in and do what's needed to stabilize, make good the buildings. So I find this sort of disheartening, and I think it's something to be looked at because if they are a safety hazard, they should have been demolished already. And
Maybe
we should not be using that as justification to be approving demolitions like this. Thank you.
Maybe I could just add one comment. I don't disagree. When it comes to applications under the Heritage Act, when a property owner, so in this case, the owner of the properties at the time, submits an application to demolish, the city has a requirement to respond within 90 days, one way or the other. And so that's why this showed up at this committee, is because we had an application for demolition that we had to respond to. And the information we had available at the time indicated to us that at least one of the buildings was an imminent risk. And I think the piece that Patrice was just speaking to is, there are standards by which the city has to follow before, for instance, the chief building official could go in and undertake the demolition on behalf of the city. And so it's unfortunately not quite as simple as you don't demolish it by this time, then we go in and do it. There is, and I alluded to that in the presentation as well. The legal process can be time consuming, unfortunately. But I agree with your perspective.
I totally appreciate, if the bureaucracy, unfortunately, can work both ways. But one also thinks that depending on who's making the decisions, can make things quite expedient where there's capacity to do that. But I'm also very concerned that in the presentations on those demolition permits, it was pushed that the buildings are unsafe. They have to be demolished right away because they pose a safety hazard to the public. If that was the case, as part of their justification for issuing a permit right away, they should have been knocked down right away. So that means that justification was not a real issue. So we're being presented a false statement about what is the reason for demolishing here. And this is something that should be looked into and should not be allowed in the future. Again, this is not sort of for you to do, but it's more for the greater city of Ottawa to deal with. And but as a Built Heritage Committee, like we're approving these things. To me, we approved something that wasn't real. So to me, that's not quite appropriate for how the system should be working. So that's the main thing I'd like to sort of make a statement here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those questions and comments. Vice Chair Plante.
Yeah, hi. I had one question, and I just didn't see it on the list, but where's 24 Sussex in all this?
Yes. There are no federally owned properties on the list.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That clarifies. My second comment is more, so my office has been really involved in the problematic properties list. It might be worth having a joint meeting with our office and them and you. I just think there's a lot of synergies in what you're doing and what they're trying to achieve. And one of the things we're working on is once, you talked about the disincentives, which I really like. And once something is determined on the list, we're still trying to kind of figure out what exactly is a problematic property. Is it so many calls? Is it so many 311, et cetera, that there would be some sort of disincentive attached just to even having that on the list, because it is very resource heavy to constantly send bylaw and paramedics and police and to these properties. It's just, and it takes lots of resources away from where we really need them in the city. So I'm happy to help facilitate that if you would like. I just think there's a lot that we could be doing jointly to sort of bring awareness to all this.
Thank you, Vice Chair. There is some overlap in the bylaw regulatory services staff who are responsible for both programs. So we do have some insight into that. And I know there are some overlap of properties that are on this list and also on that list. So I think you're right. It's worth a discussion to see if the criteria could be kind of amalgamated maybe or some commonality.
And we won't have to talk about 24 Sussex. It's great.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations. A few questions. The first is with respect to 501 Cole, which you have listed as stable. It's asserted to me from time to time by residents in the area that it's without functioning HVAC and is thus at risk. Do you share that understanding that without HVAC, the building is at risk?
I would suggest that every property on this list is at risk. Just some are more at risk than others. So I think without HVAC, the property standards bylaw has, for heritage properties in particular, some requirements around if there's no heat, for instance, then your water also should be off and the pipes should be drained so that you don't get that freeze and burst pipes and damage and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say that a lack of heating is inherently, would it be better if it was occupied and heated and ventilated? Sure. But it's not going to be the reason that this building is at risk.
Okay.
Vacancy is a bigger issue.
Sure. So just to clarify, there is no requirement that the building be heated in any of the regulations that the city has. Thank you for that. With respect to 114 Richmond, the Ashcroft Convent. This is obviously wildly frustrating. I am deeply disappointed. We gave that developer permission in 2018 to do a partial demolition in order to do an adaptive reuse. They were very keen to see that, and then simply didn't take advantage of the permissions that were provided. I don't have any evidence that that developer has done any kind of preventative maintenance in the intervening time. What liabilities, to what regulations, what laws can that developer be held to account for their failure to properly maintain that building in the intervening years?
Ms. Senta may want to add something here, but the current property owner has been subject to a number of property standards orders over the years. There has been some work done, very minor, but there has been some work done. But I believe, and you can correct me, Ms. Senta, but once the owner ceases to be the owner of this property, I'm not sure that there's really anything that the city can do.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. It's a situation where you cannot provide that direction. We can only work within the legislative framework that we have, and that does include the property standards orders that have been referenced over the years. But there's no mechanism in place to force action under those approvals that were provided, in 2018 and even with the development approvals that were provided before that time.
Can they be charged with anything for failing to maintain the building properly?
I don't have the entire sort of record list of that property in front of me, but I believe they have been charged over the years with not complying with various orders.
Okay. The, sorry, I just lost it. Sorry, so the building is up for sale. I've been in touch with the real estate agent who was aware of the heritage designation. Is it your understanding that the receiver is aware of the heritage designation and is passing that information on to potential buyers?
Yes, that is my understanding. I've also talked to the real estate agent and provided him with the information about the designation bylaw and also the previous approval that was in place for the site.
Yep. That's good. So, I mean, potential buyers need to be aware that that designation is there. Has there been any sort of communication that the city is willing to bend on that heritage designation?
Without prejudicing any confidential conversations, I have to say we haven't received a lot of inquiries.
Okay.
But I think I would publicly say that in order to save this building, I think we're all going to have to look at it quite closely.
Can the city do the work? Do we have grounds to go in and stabilize that building?
Not right now. There is an outstanding property standards order related to a condition assessment that we did order back in, I think it was January, that excuse me, the correction deadline on that has been extended until the end of June or middle of June.
Okay.
And then if that condition assessment hasn't been submitted by that time, then we would take the next step in the process. So I think one of the challenges that we face, of course, is that we can't go in and make the building perfect. We can stabilize the building so that it's not going to fall down and that it's safe and that, the heritage attributes are maintained. But we can't go in and do a full restoration or rehabilitation of the building and charge the owner back on the taxes for that. So yes, the city does have some powers to, assuming that the property owner or the future property owner does not follow through on the outstanding orders, the city does have powers to go and undertake some of that work.
Are you encouraged that the current owner is undertaking the work? I mean, as far as I know, they're bankrupt.
I don't think I can speak to that.
Okay. My encouragement would be to be aggressive with respect to work to stabilize that building. The residents of Kitchissippi, the residents of Ottawa are angry that this developer has not maintained the building, but they're angry with us as well. And I think justifiably. I get that the system is not set up to allow cities to go in and charge people with violations of laws, and it is a very cumbersome system. But this one is becoming, another Somerset House, and I, for one, will not look kindly on any application to demolish that building if it does find a new owner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Councillor Leeper. Representing Somerset Ward, where we have the poster child for demolition by neglect, which is Somerset House. And I'll also note that 330 Gilmore, which is on your watch list, is also owned by Ashcroft Homes, has also been utterly neglected, and is also a significant source of concern for the community. So I want to thank you for using every tool at your disposal, but the reality is we need better tools. I think that's what it comes down to. And so I know there's a number of us around the table that have been having conversations about, do we need a vacant unit tax for commercial properties? Because 330 Gilmore was a school board building, right? It's been sitting vacant for years and years and years. And the owner straight up told me that his intention is to allow it to rot unless he can take it down, ignore any heritage designation, and build what he wants there. That was the last meeting we had almost 3 years ago. So, there's some bad actors out there, and I think we need better tools. So I want to thank you so much for everything you're doing with every tool at your disposal. I want to thank Bylaw. I think the pilot project on problematic properties has been enormously helpful. But it is enormously frustrating when the community is very mad, similar to what Councillor Leeper is saying, and saying, surely there's something you can do. And beyond shoring up a building that could be falling over or enforcing bylaws around basic property maintenance, there's very little financial disincentive for a developer that wants to buy heritage property and just sit on it. And this is an entire block in Centertown that has been sitting empty. So thank you so much for your work, and more to come. I think we really should have conversations about better tools to prevent situations like this, because I think we end up at this point quite often in this committee. And we throw everything at the wall that we have, but we just don't have enough to be able to really fix the problem. So thank you so much.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Councillor Troster. Member Borens.
Is this list part 4 or part 5 or both?
The list includes all vacant designated properties under Part 4 and Part 5. So if you have others that you know of, you know my number.
We're still waiting for you to solve Bank in Somerset. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm assuming Councillor Leeper's hand went back up. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Why
No,
don't
sorry,
you put it back up? Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
114 Richmond angers up the blood, and I forgot that I was going to ask about. Well, we'll just bounce these back and forth for the next hour or so. McGee House. What is the status on McGee House? What risk is that? At what risk is that building? And what have been the latest, if any, actions to spur restoration of that one?
Sorry, we were just deciding who was best to answer. So the city has ongoing monitoring reports on that building. We don't really have a lot of contact with the property owner. And so we have received a recent monitoring report that will result in likely some work that needs to happen. So stay tuned. Right now, not going to collapse on the street. But
it did once.
Yes, I know. And we didn't know about it then, so I shouldn't have said that, actually. Strike that from the record.
Yeah.
Yes, but we just had a monitoring report that came in probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago that we're now following up on the next steps with Building Code Services.
Okay. Another challenging owner, and I would encourage the department to be, again, aggressive in pursuing action on that one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Leeper. I don't see any other hands raised, so I just wanted to echo many of the comments that have been made by my colleagues around this table regarding your efforts around the Heritage Watch List and especially the workshop. I think that Councillor Troster had a very prescient point in really expressing the need for more tools, especially more legislative tools for us to be able to address the challenges that we see with demolition by neglect. I was heartened by the workshop, so I'm really thankful that staff could come together with many community members from the heritage community, as well as bringing together different elements of staff to have a real discussion around community suggestions. I think that was one of the things that we heard from the heritage community explicitly, that they wanted to have inputs into the process. And that workshop was excellent in March, and doing that in terms of ideation around zoning incentives and tax reform around disincentives for demolition by neglect, applying vacant unit tax to all vacant buildings, which we heard from Councillor Troster as an idea, as well as increased inspection frequency and application of some of the process that we're now undertaking around problematic properties and tying those into the heritage process. I was really heartened by the questions for discussion that I heard at the workshop, including, based on the growing number of properties on the watch list, should we consider expanding our resources for monitoring and enforcement? I know that people around the tables were asking around of the suggestions from the workshop, which initiatives do staff believe we should prioritize implementing in the upcoming year? How might we better address the unique challenges presented by diplomatically or foreign-owned heritage properties? Should we consider expanding the criteria for adding properties to the watch list, to Vice Chair Plante's point, to include problematic occupied buildings or even city-owned structures as suggested? How can we improve incentives for heritage property maintenance while strengthening penalties for neglect? What role should the Built Heritage Committee play in supporting the continued collaboration with Global Affairs Canada? And are there examples, and I think, we'll probably hear this in future updates, are there examples of success stories from the current watch list that could inform our approach to going forward? So I thought that the workshop was very rich in ideas, that we're able to draw from community experiences and community expertise. And I hope that we continue to go down this very productive road. I really think that it was a productive session, and there is interest to see, these ideas be translated into action, and if not action, due to, frankly, some of our limited capacity at the municipality, hopefully also relaying the action that might be necessary from the province to really move us forward. So I really thank you for the work. I think it's important. It was worth a long presentation, so no apologies should be made there. There's a lot of interest from not just the heritage community, but also constituents. And so this update has been very important. And the update is received for information. So thank you so much. The last items on our agenda are information previously distributed. So we did have an item on designation refusals, as well as a report on the use of the delegation of authority for planning, development, and building services for 2024. There are no in-camera items. Any notices of motions? Seeing none. Are there any inquiries? Seeing none. Other business? See no other business. On adjournment. We're adjourned. Thank you so much. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 10th, 2025.